Whale was written by Korean author Cheon Myeong-kwan. It was translated into English by Cheon Kim, who has a stellar record of translating amazing works of Korean literature with astonishing skill. She is an amazing translator, and it was published by Europa Editions, who always publish brilliant stuff. It's a novel that was written back in 2004, and it is considered a modern Korean classic, a beloved novel in South Korea, to the point that apparently RM from BTS has this on his shelf, and he famously mostly just reads non-fiction, but he loves this book. So Whale is a pretty big deal. However, I am pretty scared of reviewing it, and I'm going to say up front that I did not finish this book. When I am sent review copies of books, and I formally review them, I always finish them. This is the first time I haven't. And yet I still wanted to make a review. I read about 100 of the 350 pages of this novel, and I have a lot that I want to say, and more importantly, a lot that I want to ask. And the fact that I didn't finish it is part of that conversation. And I do feel very guilty, and I've been feeling quite stressed about the fact that I couldn't get through this book. I'm sure that the publisher isn't happy with me, but I'm going to talk about why in a second, and I want to have a conversation about what this book did to me, the effect that it had on me. I have a lot to say. To start with, what's it about? Whale is almost a collection of interconnected narratives. It is set in a small town in South Korea, and we follow a small cast of surreal characters. It is a surrealist, farcical, satirical drama. It's often funny in a kind of shocking way, and it's incredibly entertaining in terms of the characters and the events and what they go through. 4 of the characters that I was introduced to and spent a lot of time with before I put this book down were an elderly hag, her one-eyed daughter, a woman with a strange scent that drives men mad, and who eventually builds the theatre that you can see on the cover here, inspired by the fact that she once saw a blue whale cresting in the ocean, and her daughter, who went to prison for arson and worked as a brickmaker before that, and when the novel begins, she is returning to the kiln where she would make the bricks, and she is also mute. There's an incredible amount of surrealism here. Everything that happens to these people is off-kilter. It feels kind of Alice in Wonderland. It feels like a strange dreamscape. And it's a lot of fun. Everything that happens to the people in this story is very imaginative. It's entertaining. You do feel drawn into it and you want to continue on with it. It feels like a drug. It feels like something that doesn't seem that healthy for you, and yet you want to keep going with it because the surreal, imaginative nature of the narrative and what the characters get up to, what they think and feel, and how they treat each other, it really draws you in and becomes quite addictive. And yet eventually I had to put this book down. And the sole reason that I couldn't get through it is because it is incredibly misogynistic. And the reason I'm stressed about that is because I'm not sure if it's entirely done on purpose. I wonder, because this is clearly a satirical and farcical, nonsensical thing, if the misogyny is tongue-in-cheek, if it's put in on purpose, if it's designed to be ironic, if it is triggering for fun. I have a lot of questions about it, to the point that I actually reached out to legendary Korean to English translator Anton He, asked him if he'd read this book, asked him what he thought about it, asked him what he knew about the author, and he was the one who told me about the RM from BTS thing. And the fact that apparently this novel was written in a single month, the author is supposed to be a lovely, charming, sweet guy, is quite eccentric, and is pretty beloved. And so all of that made me think, well, surely all of the disgusting, grotesque misogyny in this book must have a point to it. But I also have to be truthful to my own experiences and reactions to it, and those were not pleasant. So what I'm going to do is just read out a few quotes from this book that upset me, that I've screenshotted onto my phone. Hang on. Okay, this is from chapter 1. We're just a few pages in, and it's describing the young mute woman who went to prison for arson and worked as a brickmaker. She's showering in a river and a waterfall out in the countryside by herself. As she had never been pregnant, let alone given birth, her breasts were taut, and her pert nipples were placed high on her wide areolas. Why do we need to know that? That's just male gaze shit. That is Haruki Murakami shit. Why? Why did I need to know that? Why did I need to feel like this author was enjoying that in a really creepy misogynistic way? It's just gross. It's needless, aggressive, male gaze, demeaning, objectifying bullshit. Blech. Now, the old hag that I mentioned, she is described over and over again when she's first introduced as disgusting and gross and ugly and unmarriageable and destined to be alone forever simply because she's ugly and no one would ever love her, no one likes to look at her. She's really, 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 really ugly, okay? She's really ugly, and the author needs you to know that she's really, really ugly. Then she becomes a maid for a rich family. And the rich family have a son who is just described as a half-wit. He has some learning disabilities, mental health issues, I don't know what. He's just called a half-wit. And she is amazed one day by the fact that he has an enormous, engorged, oversized penis. One day, when the half-wit got up in the tub after his bath, the old maid's jaw dropped. Early on, she had thought his manhood was unusual, but she hadn't noticed its enormous growth over the winter, because she hadn't bathed him when it was cold. This day in particular, excited by who knows what, the half-wit's object bulged and swaggered in front of her nose. Imagine how shocked that poor old maid must have been. Feeling faint and unable to close her mouth, she ended up wetting herself right there and then. What? It gets worse too. How could she not have been stunned when she faced that special organ? It is completely understandable, if pitiful, that the old maid began to tremble, her lower regions getting warm from all kinds of thoughts. She let out the breath she'd been holding. What she did then was as indecent and bold as it was odd and incomprehensible, and that was to grab the half-wit's manhood that was nodding in her face and slide it straight into her mouth. This half-wit, by the way, is 15 years old. Then we get to the character Gumbok. Gumbok's long dormant sensuality and passion were slowly beginning to awaken. Now that her chest had swelled and puffed like an angry blowfish, and her rear had grown even more shapely, nobody could ignore her presence, even if she was labouring amongst women in dirty work clothes. For the young men, her unique, subtle scent that couldn't be masked by the stench of fish made their groins bulge despite themselves. The fishmonger detected this change in Gumbok before anyone else. He was constantly ill at ease, fearing she would leave him. Her young, fresh womb was now desiring the genes of a stronger man. This was the law of reproduction. Fucking hell. Now, this is some Haruki Murakami stuff, as I said. It is just disgusting male gaze objectification to the point that it's designed, it seems, to make women feel uncomfortable. And you have to wonder why. What's the point of that? However, because I couldn't finish this novel, I am racked with paranoia about the fact that all of this may have had a greater point. It may have all been ironic. It may have been a satire that exposes the male gaze, that makes fun of it by stretching it to an extreme measure. I think that's called a reductio ad absurdum. I'm not sure. I've heard that before. I might be using it wrong. I don't want to sound clever by accident. I can't stand when people do that. But I wonder if that's the point. To shock us and make us feel like the concept of the male gaze is ridiculous. But then I think, am I just giving the author the benefit of the doubt? I feel guilty for not having finished the novel, but I couldn't waste any more time with things like that. There's also sexual assault and abuse in this as well. And women seem to treat each other badly in service of patriarchy. I don't really understand what it's all for. And so over and over again as I read Whale, I just kept thinking, this is a Murakami novel, and it's gross. But then it's clearly very clever in its surrealism and its farcical nature. I don't know what it's satirizing, and so I feel like I'm lacking in context there, and I want to know if all of this was done on purpose, and maybe if I read on I'll find out, but I don't think that's the case. I read 100 pages and nothing was changing. I've been really stressed by this. It's an unusual review in that I'm not really reviewing it at all. I am just asking questions and wondering to myself what it was all for. I put these quotes that I just read up on my Instagram story, and the reactions I had were more than I anticipated. And this is from other writers and translators and people who work in publishing. We're all reacting going, what the hell is this book? And obviously out of context, it seems pretty dreadful. But even within context, whilst reading the novel, it didn't help in any way. So I have to think there must be a greater point to it. I want to give the author the benefit of the doubt. I want to know that there is a greater point to this, that it is farcical and satirical and absurd to the point of nonsense and stupidity to make a point about patriarchy, about misogyny, about the male gaze. But all I'm reading is those things. And if the satire isn't clear, it's not doing its job, even if that is the point of it. If something is satirical, it should be obvious enough. You shouldn't have to go digging and wondering, maybe that's what they meant. Maybe I'm being too harsh on them. Maybe, I don't know. But this is a male author exercising male gaze and male privilege. So, what am I supposed to think? I'm going to stop there. This has been a weird reading experience, and not the way my first review of 2023 should have gone, but here we are. I want to recommend this book because I always want to recommend Korean fiction. I always want to promote translators and indie publishers, but what am I supposed to do with this? And if you remove all of the misogynistic stuff, which unfortunately just carries on, everything else is really great. I love the surrealism of this novel. I really enjoy the characters, they're fun people. It's really, really engaging, and the translation is fantastic. Cheon Kim is a wonderful translator. It's a shame. I don't really know what to do now. It's not just the misogyny as well, the treatment of this 15-year-old half-wit just made my skin crawl. Well, there you go. Subscribe for books.